Hey.
Alright, so today I am coming to you with a Jeremy Sochan video. Now, Jeremy Sochan is a very fun, interesting, soon-to-be second-year player in the NBA for the San Antonio Spurs. But before we get to that point, I do just want to be transparent with y'all real quick. I did not watch that many Spurs games this year. I watched a few at the start of the season just to see what they were all about. But then, as the season went on, and they won that huge losing streak, and they lost Devin Vassell, and they lost Keldon Johnson, I just kind of lost interest in keeping track with the team. Now, one thing I will say is that I did continuously see clips every now and then of Jeremy Sochan doing something cool in the league, and from that point of view, I can say that I was a fan of Jeremy Sochan from, the Twitter clips I had seen throughout the season, but now, after I've gotten a chance to actually sit down and watch some of his games, I can say that I am a huge fan of Jeremy Sochan, and I think his future in San Antonio will be really interesting. Some quick fun facts about Jeremy Sochan from his rookie season. He started in 53 of the 56 games he played in, which is very impressive for a 19-year-old, as he also finished third on San Antonio in total games started behind Tre Jones and Keldon Johnson, and he finished fourth in total minutes, again behind Keldon Johnson, Tre Jones, and then Malachi Branham as well. Now, it's very rare for a 19-year-old rookie to see this type of burn in their rookie season. Obviously, the Spurs were the worst team record-wise in the league, or at least one of the worst. So it makes sense that they didn't necessarily have the talent in front of Sochan that was stopping him or creating obstacles for him. But at the same time, I feel like Greg Popovich just isn't usually a coach that lets their rookies do that much. And then here's Sochan, who was pretty much one of the core foundation pieces for the 2022-2023 Spurs. And another really interesting thing to point out is amongst all those minutes, Basketball Reference labeled 95% of those minutes as Jeremy Sochan playing at the 4. But as I will show you later on this video, I just don't think he played that much 4. Even in the games I watched, I don't think he played 95% of his minutes at the 4. But whether Basketball Reference is lying or not, the next domino that falls that makes this an even more interesting point is the Spurs now added 7'5" Victor Wembanyama, who has very clearly stated that he wants to play the 4, not the 5. So now, is that going to move Sochan to the 3? Is that going to move him to the bench? Those are things that I am very curious to see as this offseason goes on. I even tried plotting out a prediction for what the starting lineup will be for the San Antonio Spurs when they open up in their first game next season. And my first attempt was obviously to go Tre Jones back at the 1, Devin Vassell at the 2, Keldon Johnson at the 3, and then, it's going to be Wemby, Sochan, and Zach Collins battling for those 4-5 spots. Wemby, being, the generational talent he is, probably gets his wish and plays the 4. And you can't really, you could play Sochan at the 5, probably with Wemby at the 4, but I imagine San Antonio will probably at least start with a more traditional, big man at center in Zach Collins. And this answer really disappointed me because, again, I'm now a huge Jeremy Sochan fan now, so obviously I want to see him back in the starting lineup for his second season. So I think what a really fun lineup to run, and I have a feeling Popovich probably won't do this, at least to start, but it'd be a super fun lab to watch if they were to start Devin Vassell at the 1. He has some playmaking chops that he's shown so far. You move Keldon Johnson to the 2, which he's a bit undersized as a forward, so that could work. You throw Sochan at the 3, which he ran plenty of lineups this past season with Keita Bates-Diop and Zach Collins and pretty much just 2 other bigs, or at least, big guys on the floor. So I think that could work. And then you just finish out with Wemby and Zach Collins at the 4 and 5, and you have a, pretty solid starting lineup. Anyway, you guys did not come here to hear me rattle on about these Spurs starting lineups, because in reality, that doesn't really matter that much. So what's kind of nice about Jeremy Sochan's rookie season is that there's a pretty good dividing line, and you could sort of tell that there was a point where he started to figure things out and things started to click for him. And like a bunch of other players, that point just so happened to be All-Star break. In fact, if you split up his stats into 2 categories with pre and post All-Star break, you'd see before the break he was averaging 10 points per game, had a couple assists, 5 rebounds, a little over 1 stock per game, and his shooting numbers were pretty bad, to say the least. Then in the 8 games he was able to play post All-Star break, which, I get it, is a pretty short sample size, but 8 out of 56 isn't a total anomaly. Anomaly? Is that I don't even know if that's the right word there. So put your pride to the side and just accept the 8-game sample size where he's averaged 17 points, Assists were about the same, but he was up to over 7 rebounds per game. Stocks were about the same. And his field goal percentages were about the same or dropped off even a little bit more, but he was taking more shots, which was definitely much more encouraging. Now, for someone like me, who again did not watch that much Jeremy Sochan in college and didn't really watch him as the season was going on, I always had this idea from draft night when, I was seeing all the tweets about the draft nerds saying their pieces on Jeremy Sochan getting drafted to the Spurs. I feel like a bunch of them said things like, super good defender, doesn't really know what he's doing on offense yet, but will be a fun project to figure out. And to be honest, that is not really what I saw in watching the couple of games I watched, albeit, again, they were from later in the season. But again, I think this just goes to show how much Jeremy Sochan improved in his rookie season, which again is a very encouraging thing to see from a rookie. In fact, I actually thought his offense looked a little bit better than his defense from what I saw. Not to say that his defense was bad. Now, the thing that stood out to me the most easily was Jeremy Sochan's rim pressure on the offensive side of the ball. He's not the largest guy, but he clearly has a lot of strength and a high motor. And although his bag is, pretty shallow in terms of NBA players, he was just able to get to the rim so easily. And even if a defender was in his way, he just pushed through them. If the defense gave him a sliver of a gap to go through, he was so quick to get there and just, again, put pressure on the rim. Now, most of the time, he doesn't really have the skill to finish it. He does have some good finishing moves that he has in his bag already. But for the most part, he's no Kyrie Irving when it comes to finishing at the rim. Yet still, this rim pressure is a very important thing to have on an offensive roster in the year 2023. Plus, Sochan has definitely showed off the ability to get rid of the ball and play make after driving to the rim, which will probably be a more useful part to his game as he continues to grow as a player. And I can't believe I'm about to say this, but it really was Draymond Green / prime Ben Simmons-esque when Jeremy Sochan had the ball in his hands. In this one game I watched against the New Orleans Pelicans back in December, there was one, I think it was the second quarter, where Jeremy Sochan was the only source of offense. And I mean that. He was the only source of offense for the Spurs from the moment he checked in around the 8-10 minute mark to the end of the half. He was the only one creating advantages and that were leading to buckets for the entire roster. Another thing I really liked about when Sochan had the ball in his hands is that it was clear Popovich was giving him the ball a lot more than he should have, as a way to force Sochan to make mistakes and ultimately learn, because Sochan being able to handle the ball, pass, play, make, and dribble are going to be very important things down the line when the Spurs are eventually fighting for a championship. So while yes, there were a lot of bad turnovers and some just bad offensive miscues with Sochan handling the ball, or at least just involving Sochan with the ball, he also had a lot of bright flashes. He had some really good passes that I did not see coming at all when they happened. And he's also one of those players who are able to move the ball so quickly in transition. They grab a rebound and they just immediately hit the gas pedal and go. And Sochan, it's clear that he still has a ways to go in learning how to perfect this craft. But he is someone who is great at, again, just grabbing the rebound, pushing the ball up the court, and just trying to create advantages before the defense can be set. Because, again, those are the easiest ways to create points in today's game. And it will also be here that I have to, it's just a pet peeve of mine. I don't want to come across as too harsh, but Sochan might be one of the weakest rebounders in the NBA. Not to say that he's a bad rebounder, because again, he was up to 7 a game over his last 8 games of the season. But there were so many times where he came down with a rebound and was holding it way too lightly and not enough strength on the grip, and the other team would just rip it out of his hands and get a free basket, and it just really annoyed me. I bet Spurs fans were livid every time this happened, because I know I was. Anyway, where was I? Sochan, also a great cutter. He's really good at just finding himself open at the rim. Really good in the dunker spot. Again, akin to what Ben Simmons was like before all the hoopla. And the obvious red strike on Jeremy Sochan's offense is with the jumper. Now, I was actually surprised. He had a pretty nice post game where his little, triple threat, pull up in the defender's face pull up game was actually pretty good. And the fun part about that, if I can go on a quick tangent real quick, is teams obviously were putting their worst defenders on Sochan just because he was most of the time the worst offensive player on the court for the San Antonio Spurs, at least shooting wise. And it happened a lot in the Phoenix game I watched, where Chris Paul was guarding Sochan, and the Spurs did a good job of posting up Sochan, who is, just a larger person than Chris Paul. And he definitely struggled at first, but as the game went on, it became a go-to play for the Spurs, as Sochan was, again, just putting Chris Paul under the rim. But the three-point shot definitely has some work to do. Sometimes he just looks like he's overthinking it, especially if he's wide open. Weirdly enough, if he had a defender in his face, it made a much smoother release, and the ball seemed to tend to go in a little bit more. But yeah, the percentages were not great. Sochan will have to improve on that, at least just a little bit, year to year, if he does want to become the player the Spurs want him to be. Now, switching over to the defense real quick, I feel like it's becoming a theme in these videos that I've been doing recently. Maybe it's just because I keep on focusing on players on bad teams, but I'm not ready to pick whether Sochan is like a elite or just good defender yet, because he showed a lot of flashes. He had a lot of possessions where he stood out to me, and I said to myself, wow, that was a great defensive possession from Jeremy Sochan. But he also had a lot of possessions where he would let his guy go back door, or he just wasn't the quickest on his feet when he was guarding a smaller player, which isn't necessarily his fault. But at the same time, just for my sanity, I'm just going to go ahead and call Sochan a good defender. The steal numbers didn't quite show it, but he's got the long arms. He's able to harass ball carriers. He's able to poke it away. Much similar to the ball handling and playmaking section, but Popovich clearly was trying to push Sochan out of his comfort zone. He had him guarding a whole variety of players, ranging from wings like a Herb Jones or a Paulo Banchero to guards like a Chris Paul or a Jose Alvarado. It reminded me a lot of Nicholas Batum and how he's not necessarily the quickest on his feet, but he slides well. His defensive IQ, Sochan's isn't anywhere near Batum's right now, but I imagine it'll probably get there eventually, especially with a good coach like Popovich. But Sochan is just someone who you can throw at a lot of guys. He's a good POA defender right now, again, because of those long arms, the wingspan. He's just able to make life difficult for opposing ball handlers. Now, I don't mean this as disrespect to Jeremy Sochan, but I can see how you could take it that way. But I think one of the reasons why I am very intrigued to see where his career goes is because of Victor Wembanyama. And again, I don't mean that as a knock to Sochan. Sochan's a great player all by himself. But in bringing in someone like Wembanyama, I think Sochan is about as good as a player you could put around Wembanyama in terms of a front court partner who can do a lot of the things that Wembanyama doesn't necessarily want to do. Jeremy Sochan is a very physical guy, unlike Wembanyama, who, let's be honest at this point, tends to maybe shy away from contact more than others. Jeremy Sochan is the type of player who is going to hustle his ass off and crash the offensive glass, throw himself on the floor, do the dirty things in order to get his team extra possessions, and those extra possessions are going to lead to, for example, more opportunities for Victor Wembanyama to go do his thing and score the ball, or Keldon Johnson or Devin Vassell. It doesn't really matter. I'm just using Wemby because it's Wemby. And it's pretty on the nose, but I do think it's ironic that Jeremy Sochan is number 10 for the San Antonio Spurs, much like someone from the past who also had very colorful hair and wore number 10 for the San Antonio Spurs and did the dirty work for his fellow teammates. But honestly, perhaps the most reassuring thing about Jeremy Sochan that I found while doing my work for this video is his free throws. His free throws are very telling of how much work ethic and how hard Jeremy Sochan is going to work at the game of basketball, because he's going outside of his comfort zone, again, in this area of his game too. His free throw percentage did not start off that great when he got to the league, so he took the risk and just started shooting his free throws one-handed, which is something that is not seen that often in the NBA. But his free throw percentage improved because of it. And again, this is just, albeit a small thing and a very minor part of his basketball game, but this is something that shows, at least to me, that Sochan is willing to do, outside the box things if it means that he's going to improve at the game of basketball. And to me, that might be one of the most important things I saw from this video. And it's a huge reason why I am just, I'm rooting for him. I want to see him succeed. I want to see the Spurs succeed. They're going to be a really fun team in a couple of years down the line, and I really hope that Sochan continues to be a core piece for it. But that is enough of me talking into this mic. I hope y'all have a good one. Make sure to remember to like, comment, and subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see y'all in the next one.